My first breath in hell tasted like iron and smoke. I opened my eyes to nothing. No sky, no ceiling, no light source. Yet I could see. Not clearly, the world around me was dim, as if lit by embers buried deep beneath the surface. The ground was cracked and uneven, carved with ancient symbols I didn't know. Heat seeped up from beneath the stone, slow and patient, as though it had all the time and eternity to cook me from the feet up. I was naked, lying face down in what felt like ash and shattered bone. My mouth was dry, my tongue was thick. When I tried to breathe, my lungs caught. I pushed myself up to my knees, and my skin was already blistering. There was no sound at first, not even the wind, just the hiss of my own shallow breath. Then, somewhere in the dark, a human scream. High, long, and cut off. I tried to stand. My legs shook beneath me, everything hurt. There was no memory of falling asleep, no tunnel of light, no final goodbye. Just this. I reached up to touch my face. My hands were covered in soot, my left eye swollen, and I could feel glass embedded in my cheekbone. I walked. There was nowhere to go, but I had to move. To stop was to surrender. The terrain shifted underfoot, gravel giving way to something softer and stickier. I didn't look too closely. I kept my eyes ahead, fixed on a distant ridge of jagged rock. It was the only shape that broke the horizon. I didn't know if it was miles away or just minutes. As I walked, the screaming grew louder. Not one person, but dozens, maybe hundreds. But I never saw them. The land remained empty, yet the air was full of suffering. My skin burned with every step, and I started to notice something else. An unseen pressure. Like I was being watched. Not just seen, but examined. Like every inch of me was being studied, cataloged, and weighed. I passed through a narrow canyon carved between two great slabs of black stone. The air grew colder there, not warmer. The walls of the canyon pulsed, not visually, but viscerally. My gut twisted and I hurried through. The next stretch of land was different. Rows of pillars stood in neat grids rising out of the cracked stone. They were carved from salt-colored rock, stained dark with something that looked too red to be rust. Impaled on top of each pillar was a human form. Some still moved, some twitched, some whispered. One turned its head as I passed. It had no eyes, but its mouth moved in silence. I didn't stop. There was no wind here, no time. Just that same dull red glow and the heat that came and went in waves. Like hell itself, breathed. At some point, I stopped trying to understand where I was. This wasn't a dream. Dreams don't flay your feet open and split your lips from dryness. This place was real. More real than the world I left behind. I felt it in my bones. I came to a structure, if you could call it that. Not a building, just a flat stone surface with steps leading downward into the ground. There were symbols etched into the stone, shallow and precise. I didn't recognize the language, but it made my teeth ache just to look at them. I stood there waiting for something to happen. It felt wrong to just descend, but nothing in this place felt any more right. So I went down. The stairs were narrow and slick, carved into the black rock like veins. As I descended, the air grew thick and humid. The deeper I went, the more it stank. Like sulfur. But sharper, with a metallic tang that settled on the back of my tongue. After what felt like an hour, the stairway opened into a wide chamber. And for the first time, I wasn't alone. Figures moved in the distance, hunched and staggering. Naked, broken. I couldn't tell if they were human. They dragged themselves forward in circles, some crawling with shattered limbs, others sobbing quietly, mouthing things I couldn't hear. Their skin was the color of old bruises. They didn't react to me. It was like I wasn't there, or like they couldn't stop what they were doing. At the far end of the chamber stood a statue, towering, maybe 20 feet high. It was shaped like a man, but the proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, head too narrow. The face had no eyes, just a mouth, open and waiting. Around the base of the statue were kneeling bodies, all facing inwards, heads bowed to the stone and silent. Then something moved. Not among the damned, but behind the statue. I felt the presence before I saw it. The temperature dropped fast, like heat was being pulled away, and my breath caught in my throat. A hand curled around the edge of the statue's base. Not human, too many fingers, too long, skin stretched like leather. The creature emerged slowly, impossibly tall even while crouched. Its face was a blank plane of skin, like it had been skinned alive and the flesh pulled tight over bone. No eyes, no mouth. I froze. It turned its head toward me anyway. I didn't run, I didn't scream, I just waited for it to decide if I mattered to it. It rose higher, unfolding with the patience of something that had never known haste. Its joints cracked like stones splitting, its limbs bending in ways that defied the rhythm of human anatomy. The chamber seemed to recoil from it. The kneeling bodies pressed their heads harder into the stone until their skulls split. Blood smeared the floor, but still no sound came from them. The creature took a step forward. The air grew heavy. My ribs strained as if being squeezed from the inside. The world pressed down until my knees buckled. I fell to the ground under the weight of its judgment. Then came the voice. "You walk. You were not summoned. You walk unmarked." I tried to speak, but my throat was ash. I managed only a cough. My silence was its answer. The air shifted. Something like a claw, but more deliberate, closed around my arm. The heat of its grip seared me. The creature leaned close, filling my vision. My body trembled like it was ready to tear itself apart. "You walk, then you will be carried." I was lifted from the ground as if I weighed nothing. My ribs ground together under the pressure of its hold. The chamber bent and warped. The statue blurred. The kneeling figures collapsed lifeless in perfect unison. The wall cracked open where the creature turned its head, and a passage yawned into the darkness. It carried me inside, the stone closing behind. The walls dripped with heat and moisture. I struggled, but its grip tightened until my vision blurred white. I hung like a doll in its hand. Deeper we went. The air thickened until each breath scraped raw. Shapes shifted along the walls, faces pressed in stone, eyes open but unmoving, mouths stretched as if screaming but frozen forever. I couldn't look at them long. They disappeared into the dark as quickly as they appeared. The creature stopped before a narrow frame rising from the floor. A rack, grown from the stone itself. Without ceremony, it pressed me down onto it. Straps of living metal coiled around my arms and legs, fixing me in place. My jaw was forced open by a bar that slid into existence beneath my chin. I could breathe, but not freely. Each inhale came in a rhythm not my own. The faceless head tilted, and from the seam in its skin, something emerged. A device made of bone and thread, intricate and sharp, pulsing faintly with a lifeless energy. It set the tool against my arm. Threads burrowed under my skin with practiced ease. I tried to speak, tried to demand why, but only a rasp escaped. It tilted its head. Because you are here, and because you are not meant to be. Not yet, at least. The words were a blade to me, deep to my soul, into my core. The device worked deeper, peeling my skin like pages and laying them in order on the stone. I was conscious for all of it, denied the mercy of fainting, of going into shock. Every nerve obeyed, reporting its torment. My body was catalogued, measured, and reduced to data. Then, at the edge of my vision, a light flickered. White, not red. A rectangle that hummed with sound. Voices bled through it, urgent and human. A name, my name. The creature stiffened, sensing it, its voice sharpened into fury. You do not go, you do not rise, you are kept. The tool drove across my chest, pain flaring so brightly I saw headlights. I saw glass exploding, the wheel spinning out of my hands. In the same instant, I was back in the chamber, strapped to stone, the faceless thing looming over me. My breaths came measured. Not mine, but as if another world had seized my lungs and forced them to move. Hell bent closer, reality pressed in, and I hung between them, helpless in both. The straps did not cut and the bar at my jaw did not bruise. They simply persisted with the quiet certainty of law, and the device of bone and thread continued its work with that same silent industry, counting me, emptying me, taking notes in a ledger I could not see, and with every measured pull, I felt a thin ribbon of strength leave the arm it attended and coil into the tool as if my body had been an account kept open without my consent. Every time this needle and thread found its way into my very being, and it felt like it was threading me, my essence, into hell. The faceless being hovered over my chest. The seam in its skin held in a patient gape, and from within that vault a breath passed over me that carried no warmth at all, only a faint odor of cold metal, sulfur, and old ash. And when it spoke again, it did so without raising its voice, which made the words heavier rather than lighter. Attend, it said, and the threads burrowed deeper and spread along the line of my ribs, unhooking my skin, cataloging each layer, arranging the panels with a care that made the stones beneath my back feel varnished and clean. I tried to turn my head, and the bar allowed the attempt and then corrected it without malice. The white light returned, not as a flare at the edge of thought, but as a pane set square across the darkness. And in it there was motion. Not dream motion, but the ugly clarity of memory. A strip of wet road crawling out of blackness toward a hood. A smear of street lamps that refused to focus properly. A thread of rubber hum where a shoulder began. A warning chime I could not place. Someone spoke my name with their mouth near my ear, and the voice was the simplest thing I had heard since waking in this place. The chamber steadied. The rack steadied. The device steadied, and I watched my own chest rise and fall in a rhythm I did not set, and the pain remained until the creature placed 2 long fingers against my temple, and the white retreated a measure, not gone, only reined in like a dog taught to heel. You are here, it said again, not to persuade me, but to anchor me, and then a secondary phrase. And you are observed. And with that declaration, the work changed from survey to interrogation. A new instrument emerged from the open seam in his head. A narrow spike fashioned from the same pale material as a rack. etched with those shallow characters that made my teeth ache. The point was stained with a darkness that did not reflect light, and I knew before it touched me that the tool had been purposed beyond flesh. It slid in underneath my left eye, not blinking, not rupturing the eye, only entering. As it advanced, I felt a pressure at the rear of the socket, and then a taste at the back of my throat. "Show me," the voices said, layered as before, and this time there was a second voice braided through the first. "Show me what you saw." The road led forward, headlights cutting a low wall of rain in the segments that fought the glass, wiper blades beating a metered prayer across a view that struggled to resolve, and my hands were on a wheel that twitched every time the tires found the shallow rivers that crossed the lanes. And the black was not pure, but full of reflections from a phone screen face down in the console, its light leaking around the edges with each small vibration. And though I did not reach for it in that instant, my mind flicked to it with the reflex of 1,000 such glances. And that flick was enough to tilt the car a degree, and the degree was enough to begin the arithmetic I had been called a moment ago. I tried to fight the memory back toward ignorance, to blur the edges, to dull the sound. The spike advanced, and resistance made it eager. The straps tightened in calm stages, neither punishing nor restraining beyond necessity, and the bar under my jaw pulsed a slow count that insisted I breathe when commanded and hold still when commanded, and learn the lesson written there. You are the subject. The device along my ribs splayed bone and numbered cartilage, then set the pieces in a tiny row in the floor, as if the room had a table and we were at it. And I watched without fainting and without the mercy of shock, because fainting and shock are only allowed in the human body. And now, you're more than just a vessel. You are your soul. And everything, and I mean everything, is felt 1,000 times more than in the body. Back to reality, the lane markers ran out. The guardrail loomed, not as a wall to keep me, but as a ripe thing waiting for harvest. The front tire climbed and then lost purchase, and the car leapt with the same eager joy a body feels when a fever breaks, and for a second, there was a noiselessness that had nothing to do with silence, and everything to do with the failure of terms we use to describe air. And then there was the glass, exploding in shards everywhere. The glass found my face and my hands and the soft tissue around my left eye, and in that spread of particulars, a spike inside my head found a twin and sang against it, and the creature shuddered in a manner I would have called delight if delight had any place in that room. "Hold," it said to the straps, and they obeyed. "Measure," and the device obeyed. "Open," it said to me, and I opened, not kindling a lamp or lifting a latch, but letting the crash finish its reach through me until the car folded itself into the ditch and the ditch took it. And I hung a moment sideways against a harness that had not failed and yet had not been enough. And the white pain was gone, replaced by a pattern of red that pulsed without source. A horn sounded until it ran out. A distant motor passed on the roadway above without slowing. Rain entered the car and did not cool anything. Somewhere my name was tried again, first with care, then with a fear that almost looked like anger. "Again," the creature said, and the spike withdrew a little and entered again at a new angle. And now there were images that did not belong to this night. Hands I knew, a dashboard with crumbs that had not been brushed away, a crumpled fast food bag wedged against the passenger footwell, a child's seat ghosted in the rearview mirror that had not been mine and yet insisted on being counted. And with each new detail, the voices inside my chest took notes in a grammar I could not parse, and the ledger that was me filled its lines. The pain did not crest and break. It was a tide that arrived and remained, a static condition that taught my nerves a new alphabet. And when I tried to scream, the bar turned the sound into breath, and the room refused to be impressed. The faceless head bent closer until the scene was inches from my own face, and I could see within it not a throat, but an antechamber crowded with instruments that waited with perfect patience. And as it regarded me, the register of the voice altered from judicial to possessive. A narrow hunger. You are not writ. You are not sealed. You are not signed in the book of the left hand. The spike rotated delicately, scoring an arc that made my left side seize. You fell through. You walked. You were seen. You will be amended. Somewhere behind the creature, a movement scraped. Not large, not near, but real. And the faceless head stilled in listening, and in the pause, a thin human whisper reached me from the dark beyond the frame. A man's voice rubbed raw until the words came out, more breath than speech. Don't let it in your eyes. And the council arrived so late, it felt like mockery, and yet it landed in me with the weight of law. Because the eye had been chosen, and the door had been opened. And there are some warnings whose only purpose is to show you when the damage became inevitable. The spike pressed farther and the pain returned, this time surging from behind the creature rather than within my head. A wash of sterile brightness that overpowered the red and reached for me with gloved hands. And the faceless head reacted at once, the seam cinching, the collar of bone blooming from its throat to clamp the back of my neck to the rack as if to shield me from a theft. And the layered voices braided into a single, furious strand. Attend, it commanded, and the word struck with the force of a blow. And the pain flickered but did not withdraw. A voice beyond the brightness spoke numbers in a cadence that wanted me to return and press my breath into them, while the voice above me pronounced categories that wanted me to remain and finish my being measured. And between those two instructions, a crack opened, not in the room, not in the air, but in a chain of moments I had believed was unbreakable, and I fell into and out of it and was caught by both sides. The spike found the memory it demanded, and the rack accepted the shock that followed, and the straps held their order. Then the world narrowed to a point at the center of my skull, and the point burst and everything went dark without the mercy of sleep, and the last thing I heard before the dark settled into its governance was the creature's voice. Work resumed, counting, filing, the long exact suffering that wastes nothing. And inside that order, a thought appeared with the clarity of a verdict. Not yet. The straps held. The bar under my jaw pulsed its metronome. The spike waited behind my left eye like a key kept in a lock. The bone and thread device drank from my opened arm. I matched my breath to the bar until its vigilance softened, and when the faceless head leaned close enough that its cold breath lay across my lips, I took the slack the apparatus allowed and used it. I drove my forehead into the soft interior of its open seam. The sound was small. The effect was not. The seam cinched. The collar snapped at air. The spike jerked back. And for one counted beat, every strap forgot its orders. I tore my right wrist free, leaving skin on the band. I snatched the length of my own rib from the knee to ray on the floor and jammed its blunt end into the hinge of this left strap until the fibers yielded. Two limbs loose. The bar pressed down to punish. I wedged the cartilage beneath it, twisted, cracked my jaw loose, spat blood and tooth, and broke the last bane with short, ugly strokes. The room answered without roar or ceremony. The floor polished itself to a mirror, and hooks grew from it like decisions, but I rolled under the rack before they fully owned their rights and came up on one knee with my breath ragged and my vision burning. Walk, the voices said. And I moved toward the place where the stones made a seam. I pressed both palms to it and insisted. The wall parted with the width of a man and I went through. It closed behind me and took a strip of skin as payment. The passage beyond had no lamps, but I could see enough to run. On my right, a channel carried a black flood, the heads surfacing at intervals to breathe what was not air before submerging and returning unmarked. On my left, the rock thinned to reveal faces pressed in stone. A wider hall admitted the moving damned, bodies revised past recognition, all speaking in a single cadence that moved faster than my feet. "Return," the same voice said from everywhere at once. I stopped fighting the pressure, turned my shoulder, slid through on an angle, and gained 10 paces from the seam demon, while the house recalculated. The floor roughened and climbed. At a junction that offered the short path back and the long path forward, I chose the narrow fissure meant for smoke and let the stone take what it demanded. Clerk things chittered in the walls, setting bars for my anticipated step. The fissure opened onto a bridge grown from a fused spine from a creature long since gone and colossal in size. Vertebra flattened into a flexing walkway without rail. I crossed with my eyes on the next foothold. When a section buckled, I lowered my weight, spread it, waited for the structure to choose, and slid forward where it took me. A colonnade received me, each column ribbed with living ligatures that tightened and eased. Cold gathered until breath needled the throat. Between two shafts hung a gate without hinges. A voice spoke. "Brian, you are not sealed. You were not summoned. You are not supposed to be here. Your time is not yet up." The floor eased toward the gate. I don't know who that voice was, but it gave me hope. The bones beneath the stones drifted to that gravity, and I set my feet and felt myself losing ground. I still held the shard of cartilage. I drove it into the seam where the gate met-whirled and twisted. The geometry faltered for the length of a breath, and I took the breath and turned it into a step, then a run. The floor leveled, the cold receded, and the voice reduced to a pressure that no longer moved the bones of my ears. I ran until the colonnade gave to raw stone, and the raw stone to a chamber hung with chains. Each chain carried a small, undecorated bell. They were still. I knew if a single tongue moved, the house would speak my position with joy. I went through them as through a nursery, slow, careful, and old for the first time since waking here. Beyond, a low arch emitted a shallow shelter where ceiling and floor nearly met. I folded there, pressed my palm to the socket, and clutched the blood-slicked shard that had been part of me an hour ago. From far back, the measured voices of the damned repeated their observation. "He's trying to leave," like a ledger entry read aloud. The demon didn't hurry. Inside the dark of my good eye, the white pain brightened again, not intruding now, but arriving parallel, and a voice above it counted a pulse that did not match the bar, while another voice used my name with the expectation of an answer. Even with all the parts of me missing that the demon took, you don't die in hell. Yes, you have somewhat of a body, but you are still a soul at heart. I didn't even sleep. There is no sleep here. There is no sleep in hell. Your soul doesn't need rest. Not in eternal torment, where rest is not given. I watched my blood soak and smear with each rise of my chest. I wasn't free. I was only not held in that moment. And in that narrow difference, hope lives, quiet, untrustworthy, but alive. And while I held it with the suspicion it deserved, a pane of glass, seemingly, manifested in the air before me. It was a clean light with edges, and behind it, a voice counted a pulse that did not belong to hell at all, and another voice spoke my name without ceremony, not as an indictment or an inventory, but as a demand that assumed obedience. "Brian, stay with me." The house that I was in hell did not accept the intrusion with grace. The air thinned, The shelter narrowed as if to deny that window of light a line of sight. Chains beyond the arch stirred without sound. I had learned to fear, a hunger without administration that announced itself by scraping its limbs along stone, not because it needed purchase, but because it wanted me to know the measure of its reach. The demon was close. I did not get to choose whether to run. The choice arrived for me as a hand that missed my shoulder and closed on the wall, leaving grooves where there had been smooth rock. I turned and saw the thing that hunted. This was no faceless minister with a ledger and a law. This one wore its appetite openly, its hide armored in pale plates that overlapped like scales forged from bone, each plate studded with embedded fragments of fingernail and tooth. Its joints articulated in nests so dense that every step offered 3 directions at once. Its head narrow and triangular, and crowded with ocelli that opened and shut as efficiently as a shutter. It walked high and then low, rearing and crouching with the same calm, the long forelimbs ending not in hands, but in tools that I remember hands and had been corrected, hooked, serrated, capable of seizing and holding and tearing in the same motion. When it exhaled, the air stank of old honey and scorched fat. It did not test me with speech. It did not try to reason with me. It crossed the chamber in 2 strides, met my attempt to pass under it with a step that put one barbed limb behind my knees and the other across my chest. It lifted me as easily as ash. The window pane of existence flared to meet the motion, and I saw the silhouette of a head and a cap bend into the light, and a hand rise with 2 fingers to feel for what it expected to find and did not. And while that hand searched my body on the real world, in a world not here where the limb across my chest pressed down until the ribs cracked, and a thin internal whining that I recognize now as the last sound before a void began to build, the demon corrected its hold, as if I were a tool it preferred to use properly, and cradled me against its armored torso and ran. That window pane of existence back on Earth still opened. It still shined brightly, giving me sight into what was happening to my body. EMS. People trying to revive me. It faded out. Then the demon ran as if the corridors had been made to suit its length, which perhaps they were, climbing and dipping in a sequence that kept momentum without ever granting a true descent, and it did not conceal its passage because there was no need. Walls parted where it willed, floors strengthened under its weight, and the room that had been my shelter became a pocket behind a throat swallowed and forgotten. In an antechamber without features, it stopped and affixed me to a frame that rose from the floor. Not the careful rack of the minister from the demon before, but a rougher apparatus, built to deliver pain and punishment. A crossbar locked the shoulders, a board under the spine set to flex, a yoke that took the throat without cutting the airway and made it a handle. It did this with the speed of a crass person who has repeated a task long enough to no longer think, and it stepped back to admire it. Then it began. The first motion was a downward strike of the heel of its limb into the center of my chest, delivered not with rage, but with a measured force that depressed the bone and then allowed it to rise again and again and again, a cadence that wanted 60 to 80 in a minute and took them. A rhythm so familiar that that window pane of existence brightened before me again, and white coats crowded its edges and a gloved hand formed a seal over my mouth, and a nose and another hand squeezed a bulb and my lungs accepted air without my consent. And for a heartbeat that lasted a very long time, I understood 2 truths with the same clarity: that I was being compressed and ventilated in the world above, and that I was being compressed and denied breath in the world below, and that neither would ask me if I agreed. The demon did not look in my face. Its many small eyes tracked the rise of my chest as if it were watching a bellows, and when the rise did not satisfy, it altered the depths without apparent effort, driving the board beneath me to flex, my spine bowing, my ribs protesting, trying to keep my lungs from inhaling. And somewhere inside the pain, a part of me counted with the other voice, the one that spoke numbers in a calm that did not belong here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, breathe. And on the 5th compression in hell, a hand squeezed a bag up there on the earth, and on the 10th, a second hand took over the compressions there, while a barbed limb replaced a wedge here, and the two met in the center of me like disputing jurisdictions. The memory that the minister had wanted now unfolded in full without the spike to guide it. The road returned, not in fragments, but as a long coil of wet blackness and sporadic light. The phone screen that had bled around its edges earlier now turned full face up and glowing with a name I did not need to see to understand. The sound of an alert that had no business meaning more than the work of the wheel. My eyes flicking for a fraction that cost more than I earned. The right tire catching the slick lip where asphalt gave to gravel. The weight shift that starts everything and it pretends to be a correction. The rail ahead not a wall but an invitation. I tried to turn the memory away, and the demon pressed with its heel to remind me that this effort belonged to it now. And up there someone said my name again with irritation and fear braided together. And here the yoke tightened to keep the throat within reach. When the first shock came up there, I felt it down here. Not as electricity, no current travels this stone, but as a seizure of time that pulled every motion tight and then let it go. The demon froze with its heel in the air, and the small eyes opened and shut in a random scatter, and the yoke bit down, and the board flexed in a single hard bend. And the window plane of existence flashed, and a voice said, "Clear." And another said, "Shock delivered." And the monitor declared a flat refusal to be encouraged. And the heel descended when the rhythm resumed, deeper and angrier in its precision. I did not know when I began to speak. I heard my voice before I recognized it as mine, asking a question that did not belong to this room or that apparatus or the panes or the rails. Why me? Not as innocence, not as a plea, but as a poor attempt to understand aim. And the demon ignored the words because it cared not for explanations. It cared for possession, and possession does not condescend to reason. Instead, it changed implements and drew out from behind its body a tongue of dark metal that steamed in the air and pressed it across the notches of my ribs, and listened to the sound those notches made when heated. And above, a nurse said, "Bag 'em," and the bulb squeezed and my lungs took air they had not earned. The room around us changed without moving, which is to say its law shifted. A wind that had no origin pressed from the ministerial corridors through this rough chamber like an argument, and the bells I had threaded earlier rang without hands. And from the threshold of the antechamber, a voice that had once measured and now counted narrowed to a single score. It called across to the hunter without looking to me at all. "Return it." The hunter pretended not to hear and drove its heel again, and the pain flared until the light hurt even a dead eye, and the world above thinned the barrier with the sound of tires grinding gravel and an engine ticking as it cooled, and a man in a uniform swearing under his breath because my pulse would not present itself. "It's not fair!" the hunter screamed, and its voice was many discordant notes crushed together, insect and man and metal abused, the words dragging across the throats until they found one we both understood. "He's mine!" And the light answered with gloves and paste and pads and a command for quiet that no one obeyed because a heart ignores decorum when it chooses. And the heel struck and the board bent, and the bag filled my lungs and a tube slid against my tongue and the world tried to choose. I called out to God. One of the few words I even uttered down in hell. I called out to him. I called out to Jesus. I called out for help. A moment passed, just a moment, and the most brilliant light of warmth and love burst into the room. A hand bigger and more beautiful than I can ever comprehend came into the room, tossed the demon aside with a flick, and picked me up in its loving embrace. The window pane of existence flashed before me again. We got something," and another said, charging to 200, and the numbers felt like psalms spoken under breath at the edge of a war, and the pane widened until I could see the ceiling of a vehicle, and straps that were not demonic at all, and a light meant for healing. And the hunter howled a grievance that shook dust from the stone. "He's mine," it said again, breaking the sentence across its own teeth. And the voice replied in the same patient register it used to name me. "He is writ elsewhere." And to hear that pronouncement with my name somewhere in its shadow was the strangest mercy I had ever known. He was only meant to see, not meant to stay. The hand lifted me up. It lifted me up and up and up until I could register it no more. There was no fade. There was a break. Heat left without negotiation. Love that enveloped me in more ways than I can ever put to words. Cold brightness flooded. The collar's pressure fell away, and the board under my back became plastic, and straps that had not grown out of stone but stitched from fabric settled across my shoulders and broke free. And the first sound that meant life stuttered into the room. A coarse rhythm on a screen that someone called out as a number, and then guarded like a candle in the wind. I coughed around an airway that had been placed while I belonged to someone else and tasted antiseptic and copper, the way you can tell when a rainstorm's about to hit. Hands held me, but not in a negative way. It was compassionate and calm. And a voice near my ear said, "Brian, stay with me." And another voice counted compressions even as my chest began to rise on its own because the habit of forcing breath outlasts the need for it by a few beats. Doors banged, a ramp lifted. Fluorescent light pinned me to the present. The vehicle lurched and steadied, and a siren's wail did what it always does, which is nothing to the dead and everything to the living. And I felt each squeal of the tires along the frame patted beneath me, and understood in that mechanical translation that the world had its own cruel ways that were aimed at last toward keeping. In the emergency room, the sound widened into a whole choir of useful noise. Overhead tones, curtain rings, metal trays. The clipped exchange of people who do not need to raise their voices to command time. I watched gloved hands peel away tape that had been laid in a different jurisdiction and replace it with their own. Watched a syringe crack its cap and feed a clear line. Watched a pen light strike my left eye and held my body still when every nerve wanted to recoil from that familiar intrusion. Hell did not vanish right away. It retreated to the edges and wore the shapes of the room for a while. A seam in a curtain that looked too much like a fault in rock. The curve of a ceiling track that remembered hooks. The shadow in the corner that had the patience of... Once, like a draft under a door, the hunter's grievance returned, thin now. A voice carried down a long stone hall. "He's mine." No decree answered it aloud this time. There was only a cooling at my left ear, and the sense of an entry in a ledger that did not allow argument. A physician bent into the frame of me, eyes clear, face open with the professional distance that is its own kind of compassion. "Brian, can you hear me?" I could. and the nod I gave cost more than speech and brought more than an essay. He touched my wrist where a pulse should be and found it, pressed the diaphragm of a stethoscope against my ribs that ached from good violence, and listened hard enough that his own breath stopped, shone the light again, and watched the pupil answer with annoyance rather than fear. A man with Middle Eastern tan bronze skin and long hair stood next to me. A gray beard, a halo of light surrounding him. So beautiful, it was hard to look at, but impossible to look away. He squeezed my hand and said my name like it belonged to me again and to him. Then the purge, because the body, when it returns, throws off what's trying to keep it. I retched around the adjunct and tears ran without permission, and a shudder went through me that rattled the rails, and no one scolded and no one turned away, and even that was a mercy. And no one saw the man who held my hand and said my name. No one but me. The room found its slower machinery, the steady nag of the monitor, a drip ticking through its chamber, voices dropping to working quiet. The beautiful man next to me gave me a smile and a nod, and he slowly began to fade away. But his love didn't. It stayed with me. I looked at the band on my wrist and saw my name spelled right and the date printed in a font that did not judge me. I drew a breath that was mine from start to finish, and it hurt, and I kept it. The sedation brushed past, and I refused to follow it all the way down, guarding the doorway of my mind, because some part of me remembered a collar that could close without warning. And instead of sleep, I took inventory. 10 fingers and moved when told. Toes that answered late but answered. A throat that swallowed because I willed it, not because a bag demanded it. All my ribs were there, all my skin. A nurse dimmed the light and said the sentence you cannot hear down there because truth is contraband. You're safe. And it landed. I formed one word in my head. I held it there until it stopped being a thought and became a vow. Enough. Not shouted. Enough of the glances that buy you a fraction and cost you a life. Enough of the small thefts that add to a large sum, larger than you meant to owe. Enough of the sliding that calls itself lucky and is only practice for falling. The ribs hurt. The air tasted like placid and salvation. I would change my life. I would dedicate it to God. The work would start while it still hurt. Because if I waited for comfort, the house below would have its say again. And I have no interest in being summoned there a second time. I'll have faith in His Son and the many rooms He has prepared for us. I close my eyes, not to surrender, but to hold on to what I have been given without dropping it.